another episode of Technically. Today I have some special guests. I don't like the team they support, but these guys are top of their field when we were talking about journalism, sports journalism in Zimbabwe. I hope they don't think that I'm just buttering them up. With Barry and Mike, I'm sure when you hear the voices, you'll know who exactly they are. Hi guys.
I mean, you're a consummate nutstroke.
You really are. And don't worry, we made the payment. So the nice thing you said, it's spot on. Yes, awesome. And you'll need to lay it on midway through some of it.
Awesome.
A bit more. Yeah.
I hope it's USD, not local currency.
Absolutely. But listen, it's good to be here.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for inviting us. So I have been racked with a question in my head about what sports journalism, for example, and what fandom was like before the advent of social media and the internet. So the internet is something that you can't say didn't exist. To me, it feels like it's always been there. But for sports fans, the generations are vastly different. So when I speak to my dad, for example, he doesn't even touch Twitter. But he knows what the starting 11 for Dynamos in the 1980s was simply by newspapers, by radio. They used to sit around and listen to football on the radio. He still does that in the car, which is freaking strange. So you guys, I'm guessing, were kids in that era? I was not born. I was still an idea.
Yeah,
an idea. So I want a reflection from you guys of, let's start with way back when in the 80s. I don't have a reference to that. And I'm guessing that's why I brought you guys here. I don't have a reference to I'm used to seeing people, shouting and whatnot on Twitter and Facebook, but I don't know what it was like back when things were more innocent.
Yeah, I think one of the a takeoff point would be to correct a misconception. I think we don't view ourselves as sports journalists per se.
Okay.
I think we are more sportscasters. I think we sort of like came in, especially on the Zimbabwean market. We weren't giving you sort of like reports on games. I think we were able to work on the healthy alignment where the information meets a bit of education and also entertainment to make the news very palatable to our audiences. So that's where we sort of like come in. So we're not going to be the guys with the pens and Croxley notepads at sports events, noting that there was a goal scored in the 13th minute. I think ours is to really just observe what's happening and develop opinions based on the events that we're actually attending. So I think we always need to sort of like correct that misconception between what is the standard journalist and then someone who can be termed a sportscaster. I think we fall into the sportscasting category.
Yeah, and I mean it's a little bit demeaning to sports journalists because they do a lot of hard work and go out and get the story, dig it up and all sorts, and then for us to just simply dive into there without actually having put the blood, sweat and tears out is a little bit wrong on them as well. So it's better to just get right in there. But then now putting our fan hat on, which is going back into time. And listen, you're absolutely correct. I can't figure a time when what we did when there was no internet, but except when a question like this comes up. And you then go back and think to yourself, we had a way of receiving and consuming the information related to the sports, because firstly, you didn't have a ubiquity of television sets. Let's start there. Right now, there are very few households that don't have a television set, and I'm including rural areas even. Back then, in urban areas, there were many households that didn't have TV sets, so you don't get to consume games at the level and scale that you do now. Similarly, radios and radio sets weren't as pervasive as they are now because not everyone had a car. Presently, just the state of our traffic in Harare alone just tells you that many people have vehicles. So you would make a plan in order to consume live content. But if you missed out on the live content, you then had outlets that would give you a narrative that came out of that. And the Herald, we had one newspaper, guys. That's all there was.
That's it.
And it was in black and white. So fully black and white. And yet, you still knew the starting lineup for Zimbabwe Saints. Lancashire Steel. You knew who played for these teams and could still critique a national team coach when he made these national selections. So it was a passion game. That's what that speaks to me.
Yeah.
Because you'd have to go out and actively seek out the information. Now you just scroll. If your thumb works, you'll find the information.
You're able to get the information. And I think also it was a process. Dynamos would play Highlanders on a Sunday. And if you were sort of like from our backgrounds, I was in a rural background, you would be getting the Parade magazine that would come out a month later, and you'd still be keen on the story. Then, even though the game was played 3 weeks ago, it would have the pictures, it probably had the center spread, poster of the winning team. And so those are sort of like the platforms on which we consumed the content. Barry talks about radio. I mean, radio, especially in the rural areas, was phenomenal. Now, there weren't many of them, but the communities opened up their homes, their shops. Stores were a big thing back then. There was always a local record bar.
Yes.
We had one out in Sanyati. So this is the guy who sold music. It was called a record bar. He sold the
LPs,
the
and 12 inches.
And,
Vinyl.
And
means
what,
nothing to you.
and so because he had something of a PA system, he would then, whenever the big games were played, he would basically just have
Put
that
a speaker
game,
out.
put the speaker out, and the entire growth point would be listening to the game. And so his little kids would go to the shops and would listen to the games and so forth. So that's how we consumed the content back then. And we got into Rufaro, into Barber Fields, into the National Sports Stadium before we even came to Harare or Bulawayo. Our imaginations, were a phenomenal thing back then. I mean, we would picture ourselves literally sitting there because the commentators were so good. They were so descriptive. The addiction, whether it was in Shona, in Ndebele, in English, was excellent. The way that they described situations during the game, the way they were able to build up to a game, the way that they commentated on the game as it went on was really absolutely something to behold because you literally could see it.
Yeah.
You literally could see it.
Yeah.
And so that is how we really went about it. And of course, the newspapers, we would get newspapers. The bus would come with the newspaper. I remember the bus would sort of like, the first bus from town would sort of like hit Sanyati around 12 o'clock. And that would be the first newspaper that you would get. And, there'll be an almighty scramble, And then we also had, for example, the Castle Nat Brew back there.
Yes,
they would have the calendar.
Yeah.
So the calendar confirmed to us who the biggest stars in the country were.
Yes.
Because we'll then look at the calendar and say, right, those are the 11 soccer stars of the year. Those are the best players in the land.
Yeah. And so now I think the transformation is it's more than a sea shift. It's transformed completely. And the tragedy is, I would hazard to say that the fan is less knowledgeable now than the fan back there. I know it's an oxymoron, it's paradoxical, but even though there's so much information and so easy to get out there compared to back then, because I suppose you valued it more, because it was so hard to get, you really...
It was also passion-driven, Barry,
and passion,
which you mentioned early on.
Yeah.
It's your passion that drove you to seek out the information.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a fall off between me just being on Twitter looking at teams to you guys who had to actually go to the places to find the information, to find who was playing when, to listen to the games? Because now you can throw a pirate stream on and watch a game.
You know the old adage, familiarity breeds contempt. Because everything is so readily available. I think we don't respect it enough. And we look at it very differently from the way that we looked at things when we were growing up. I mean, for you to get that center spread in a Parade magazine and stick that in a book or on the wall in your house, that was a cherished something. I mean, the calendar, when it came at the end of the year, we would go and offload the Natru truck just to curry favor with the local barman so that he could say, listen, mabatsira, kutakura makret, here's a calendar. Because not every home had that calendar.
Yeah, it's true.
It wasn't readily available. It was a cherished thing. It's something that grown men would fight
Would
for.
fight over, yeah.
That calendar. It was a cherished possession. So I think because we didn't get things so easily, we cherished them more.
Yeah.
And therefore, even when we went to a football game, which wasn't as regularly as we do now, you go and watch a Dynamos game. I mean, my first game was a Highlanders game at Remuka Stadium. They were playing Rio Tinto back then. But I was full of questions throughout the 90 because I knew that I wouldn't be watching Highlanders again for the foreseeable future.
For a long time.
I wanted to know, who was that? Who's the goalkeeper? What's his name? Mercedes Swanda watching the Upi. Willard Kumala watching Argupi. You know, I would be asking questions because it was such a phenomenal thing to have gone and watched this great Highlander side. And so I think maybe now, just because things are readily available, and also because we also competed with so many things. Back then, there was no NBA, there was no NFL, there was no English Premier League. Well, it was there, but you only got it, once a week on Wednesdays, if you had a TV.
Correct.
Then there was no La Liga. There was no Italian football. In fact, European football in Zimbabwe really took off early 90s.
Yeah.
That's when it took off.
Sort of, and all you got, late 80s into early 90s, all you got, if you were lucky, was the big league soccer. And on a Sunday, and then a midweek type show that would round up all the games for England, and then you had the Champions League final, the European Cup final. That was all you had, and back then obviously it was still on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night.
That's it.
And that was it. So the competition for your attention was limited to you having or following the domestic game more so than the international game. And that's just from a sports perspective. Never mind the fact that now there's Idols and Comedy Central and CNN and Netflix. And so the amount of, and just Twitter in itself, because all it takes is for Mike to take his cap off in Harare City Centre and Twitter goes off.
Mike was bald, and
and it kicks off. Nothing to do with sport. And so now that's what we're following. So back then, perhaps, if you want to turn a phrase, it's probably the purity of sport. The fan experience or the fandom was as pure as, I would say, the performance on the pitch itself.
We consumed local. And our corporates as well, in terms of dollars, had no option but to invest in local because that's where the numbers were. That's why there were so many sponsored cup competitions in our local game. The Chibuku Cup, the Castle Cup, Rothman's Shield, the
BP
Rose
Cup.
Bowl, BP Cup. There were as many as 6 or 7 cup competitions in our local game. And that's because the corporates had no choice to go there because that's where the numbers were. People were not looking at international footy because they just had no access to it.
And then don't forget that when we move on a little bit into sort of mid 80s, television is becoming bigger, and a few more households have televisions, or at least in Murain, there's at least one house with a television. You're not necessarily getting live games at that stage because live TV is not a thing. You're getting Game of the Week. So you're listening to Charles Mabika on a Sunday, on radio, and you're like, wow, that sounded like an epic game. And then you're watching it on the Wednesday evening on ZBC. So again, it is about, and I think that reinforcement, that consistent, the lack of choice, the lack of the potpourri we have today, I think made it so pure that you only had one option, and it made you an absolute super fan for the local game. And the tragedy is that the local game then hasn't moved on or evolved enough to try and retain that attention of the local fan.
Interesting that you brought that up, because you both brought two interesting points. The fact that local corporates were sponsoring local competition because they didn't have access, right? And the fact that Barry brought it, that local football didn't keep in step with the developments internationally, because now we can see that academies all over the world are training at ridiculously high levels in comparison to what we see.
We didn't grow with the international game. Yeah.
So I don't know, you guys are both business people. So for a moment, let's just look at a business perspective. With the influx of all of these stimulants, NBA, NFL, La Liga, EPL, all those Bundesliga, and the local game itself, what can you divine as just business people and fans? What happened to our local game in terms of money? In terms of not because interest follows money, right?
Yeah.
So what happened in that gap?
Well,
When did it happen?
I think like Barry said, the game failed to keep up with developments abroad, and also with the fact that I think television was the big game changer.
Yeah.
Television, in that we then had the national broadcaster start to offer more content. So it just wasn't international football, it was now international sport. So we now had programs like Trans World Sport. We now had programs like Gillette World Sport Special. So we now had people watching cricket and thinking, oh, that's great. Zimbabwe got test status as well in cricket. We started to see international sports stars show up at Harare Sports Club. People that we'd only read about in newspapers. Your Martin Crows, your Graham Hicks, Graham Thorpe, Graham Gooch, Shane Warne, Steve Waugh. Those guys were showing up to Harare. So those sports were now developing, of course, a fan base of their own. Tennis as well was doing well. Andre Agassi showed up on these ranks. He was world number one then. He was the glitziest, biggest star in world tennis. That's the equivalent of having Rafael Nadal in Zimbabwe.
Coming to the City Sports
now,
Center.
coming to the City Sports Center.
Was that Davis Cup?
To play. Yeah, Davis Cup.
Okay.
Because we were competing right at the top. So that competition, but going back to TV is now offering a lot more. And then also there was the switch from largely black and white to color, which made everything glitzier and more glamorous on TV. All of a sudden, we discovered that, at going to the A-Team, I remember, there was a series called the A-Team with Mr. T and Hannibal Smith and so forth. I remember being so disappointed because we always thought that little van was black.
Yeah, well,
and then only to discover that it had a red line down the middle. So TV really changed the game. But and that's where we fell off, because our corporates also started to turn to that entertainment, which had a growing fan base, and started to pump in money in those programs, started to pump in money in other sports. We saw the huge corporate dollars that went into cricket when they found sort of like an international platform, test status. They were playing at the World Cup. Now football at that time, yes, still great, but in terms of us having definitive success stories, we didn't have. And success stories are key in growing your fan base and your audience. We've seen it in Barcelona. Barcelona went from the doldrums to become the biggest brand in world football in 10 years on the back of sustained success. Football didn't have that. The only time we saw a glimpse of it was Dynamos Champions League run in 1998, where Dynamos went all the way in the CAF Champions League final. It galvanized the nation. Whether you liked Dynamos, you hated them, you envied them, but we all followed the Dynamos success story, whether watching it on TV or whether attending the football games at the National Sports Stadium. But that was something that the corporates could throw their money behind. Why? Because there were eyeballs.
yeah, for sure.
There were feet going through the turnstiles. And so that's always critical. So football, in many ways, because we don't have sustained success in the sport, whether at national team level or even at club level, was always going to fall victim to that.
And there's always an afterglow, as it were. So 1998, Dynamos goes all the way. And if you track it and then look at sort of 5 to 8 years after that, and then 10 years later, they managed to make the semi-finals of the Champions League. Dynamos got a huge amount of corporate dollars behind them. Hyundai, who sponsored Dynamos at one stage when they were big here. Nestle came in, and Blue Ribbon, all sorts of corporates jumped on the Dynamos bandwagon because of success. So that's from a success perspective. But at the same time, to sustain success, you need money. And then you follow the story of what made other leagues successful. It was the money that came in, like Mike said, from TV. And we never got that. We still haven't got that. We had a glimmer of it when SuperSport was broadcasting our games here. Yes, it wasn't a great deal. But it meant that at least money was going into the clubs. That was a stipend that wasn't earned from commercial activities, from gate takings, match day. It was revenue that came from broadcast. So now that revenue line actually could be populated. So it assisted our teams. But barring that, we haven't had that. 1992, England transformed forever and still hasn't come back off that upward trajectory when B-Sky B came in with the millions, then hundreds of millions into the British game, and it just turned into billions and so on and so forth. You look at the transformation of the Champions League. TV. It was TV that transformed
South Africa, closer to
South
home.
Africa,
the
TV.
South African League is the commercial success it is because of the money that's coming in through their TV deal with SuperSport.
So if
it's simple,
so then we then have a couple of things that we've had a single broadcaster for many years. That's transformed now. Obviously, we've had new licensees that have come on stream. ZTN is there now, 3K TV is there, and all sorts. But previously, we only had one broadcaster, and that broadcaster was a state broadcaster. Now, the tragedy with state broadcasters, if you recall, again, the English scenario is that you had the BBC that worked a lot with football, but state broadcasters survive on license fees and not commercial revenue. So similarly here, the state broadcaster is never going to be the answer. No matter how much, unless government steps in and actually gives them the money, the state broadcaster is never going to be the answer. So the broadcasting space needed to open up sooner for private players to come in, and then hopefully that broadcast revenue then comes into sport in general and football specifically for that evolution to start. Of course, then you need to have the ideas to then progress the ball, to borrow a football parlance.
So when we look at social media, if you want to operate on social media, you need to understand that you're a brand. If you're a club, whatever it is, you're a brand. So Bulawayo Chiefs FC is probably the best example of, you're not necessarily the best football team, but you have people in there who know what they're doing when it comes to pushing the buttons on social media. To the point that they get verified, and AS Roma mentions them and all that kind of stuff. From your experience, as let's both say as fans and pundits and sportscasters, have we seen that in Zimbabwean teams, let's say football across the board, right, from football all the way to tennis, embracing the brand nature of what social media is, speaking to people with an identity that is unidentifiably or whatever, a Dynamos tweet?
Well, that's good. I'm glad you brought Bulawayo Chiefs up, and I think they must be commended for making a start, because that's what I'll call it. It's a start. It will really be complete when they're able to convert the social media interest and curiosity into feet through turnstiles at matches where they're playing. So right now, I think they've done a lot to build their brand in the digital space, but they haven't yet got a strategy of how they can convert that interest, that following, those numbers into people who ultimately say, hey, Bulawayo Chiefs is in town, I need to go and watch a Bulawayo Chiefs game.
I'm a fan.
I'm a fan. Okay? So that is where, so that's why I'm saying they must be commended for starting that journey. And unfortunately, our clubs have sort of like latched onto the digital game a bit late, and then even their use of the digital space is largely really confined to banter and just sometimes really aimless posts that don't do much to grow their brand and to develop them. And this is mainly coming from Bulawayo Chiefs. Now, Bulawayo Chiefs won't be criticized because what they did is that they created their own persona on social media. So they're a very young brand. They're fun. Humor was a big part of what they did and what they do still. And so what you notice is that because it worked for Bulawayo Chiefs, every club is trying to do the same. All those that have come after Bulawayo Chiefs are trying to be like Bulawayo Chiefs. They're trying to be witty like Bulawayo Chiefs, and sometimes they don't have the wit. They're trying to be humorous like Bulawayo Chiefs. Sometimes they don't have the humor, and so forth. So that is where the problem has been, where these clubs haven't defined themselves to say, hey, listen, we are, let's say, Dynamos. We are the country's biggest and most successful team. That already should give you an edge on social media, but it also should dictate how you actually communicate on social media. You're the big boys. That's who you are. You are the kings of Zimbabwean football. And even your persona on social media should reflect that. Sometimes we don't see it. And so we have Caps United trying to be like Bulawayo Chiefs. Chicken Inn trying to be like Bulawayo Chiefs. Highlanders wading into their FC Platinum sometimes wade into their, then they retreat and so forth, type of thing. It seems like they're caught up in between. Do we, we are FC Platinum, classy, rich, successful, or do we also engage in this? And so these guys are not really thinking it through, because what I see is they've got guys who are just posting for the sake of posting, but there is no clear strategy behind what they are doing. There are no targets. What are they trying to achieve by their presence on social media? Yeah.
And the bedrock, I think, to any social media content strategy or whatever the case may be, has got to be a robust and solid club strategy. So fans follow success. We just spoke about that. And so you can't, look, you can have the millions of followers on social media, the thousands of followers on social media. But ultimately, your core business is that you play football. You're a football club. Play good, entertaining, winning football. And get the fans into stadiums. And they'll follow you on social media for sure. No worries. So, do you want to be a social media strong brand and a football weak brand, or do you want to be strong in both worlds? I think you can be both.
Yeah.
But tragically, what we're seeing now is more so those that are strong in terms of their socials are weak in terms of their core business.
Interesting, because from what you guys were saying, your experience as children growing up made me realize this is how ultras are born. Football ultras.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's how they're born. They're not born on scrolling on
social media.
On social media. It's impossible to build an ultra. So I was watching, I think, Athletic Bilbao's ultras. Amazing.
No, athletic club.
Bilbao.
To call them Bilbao is actually a spite on those ultras you're talking about.
Yeah, so athletic club.
They'll come for you.
Ultras. It was amazing to see that. How they respond. Galatasaray, Fenerbahce's ultras. Those things are built in communities.
Yes.
And are we not missing the point locally when it comes to the grassroots level, the people who are in those areas? I don't see any clubs that are popular, let's just say popular, outside of Harare. Most clubs are based, let's say, in Harare. A good number of clubs are based in Harare. But the clubs that are based outside, you don't see too many supporters. I was in FC Platinum game a while back. And even people speaking about the club was something I didn't really experience.
Well, to be honest, identity is key in building that core group of supporters. So the core followers of Dimbare are from Mbare. Same thing with Highlanders as well. They've got a very clear identity. And that's why those teams are sort of like have got the following. But it's not just that they have an identity, they've also had the success to keep those fans there. We don't have, unfortunately, sort of like the European model where there are strong local identities. We used to have it, and I know you're talking about FC Platinum, but FC Platinum actually is not the biggest club in Shabani. Shabani is actually the team that's supported by the locals. They patronize that team more. FC Platinum, remember, is a team that's barely 12 years old as far as Zimbabwean football is concerned in terms of playing at the very top. Shabani is the team that the locals have always supported and associated with Shabani. Same thing if you go to Masvingo as well. Masvingo United, hugely popular team there. The locals would fill up Macheke Stadium. You go to Kwekwe, the likes of Lancashire Steel. Go to Kadoma, the likes of Rio Tinto, then A4 Flats and so forth, Mangura and so forth. So we used to have that, but unfortunately when the dollars fell away and sort of like the economy hit the troubles, and then a lot of the dollars were pulled away from these institutions, they also fell away. And a lot of the teams that now exist, you'll find predominantly in Bulawayo and in Harare. That's where the majority of our teams are. I think Harare's got 7-8 teams. You got Bulawayo with another 4-5 teams and so forth. That is where the football is being played. So I think, it's very difficult for us to do that, to develop, because most of these teams, Yada, for example, is a church team. It's funded by a ministry. He's only ever going to get those that go to his church really to support that team. A lot of work to do to break into the fan base that has already been dominated by your Dynamos, your Caps Uniteds, ECs, ETCs. So it's very difficult to sort of get a fan base going in Zimbabwe because we just don't have local loyalties. In England, for example, if you grow up in Liverpool or Merseyside, you're going to support Liverpool, Everton, or Tranmere Rovers. Those are your teams. That's who you're going to support. If you grow up in Manchester, same thing again. The two Manchester teams. You grow up in Bradford, you're going to support Bradford before you think of supporting Arsenal, Chelsea, and so forth. So they've got strong local loyalties, mainly because the teams actually do exist. They function very well. They've got the structures in place. They actually compete at decent levels when they're playing in Ligue 1, Ligue 2, etc. But they're actually performing at a so it's easy to get loyalty to something that's actually there than to ask our guys to support a team that's probably in Division 2B or whatever they're doing, simply because they're in Chegu 2 or they're in Rusape.
But and fandom is a point of pride, isn't it? It's about being proud of the entity you support, being able to pin your colors to the mast and say, I am a fan of that club. The tragedy in Zim is we don't start with belief. Get the people to believe in what it is that you're doing. Yes, it's a geographical thing in Catalonia, but you'll find the Catalans refer to Barcelona as the Catalonia national team. So that's a pride piece. What are our clubs making our fandom believe in? You've got to give them something to hold on to that says, that's my club because we do things differently. We are this, we are that. And what then happens is that it turns from just being a core of ultras into a movement, and everybody wants to be a part of this because you're getting onto or into the journey. But sadly, we are focused on building brands, but not the product. So you'll have a great brand like Blair Chiefs, but their product is football, and it's not bashing Blair Chiefs. It's just as an example. The brand is great, but the product is weak because the product is the football. Imagine if Blair Chiefs is playing exciting. I'm not saying win the league, but you're playing exciting football that everyone is talking about. That when you go to Blair Chiefs game, you're going to be entertained. They may lose 3-2, but you're going to be entertained. That's what a football fan wants to hear, and that's what's going to draw someone to get off their couch, stop scrolling, or stop watching the English Premier League and troop across to the National Sports Stadium and watch what Blair Chiefs is about.
I'll give you an example. I remember I came back and I told Barry, I was like, guess what, Barry? I was in a shop, and in Manchester. Dad brought in their kid, wanted him to buy him his first United jersey. I was right there. I was picking up a couple of shirts myself. The kid refused. I could see the disappointment that was etched on that man's
dismay.
He couldn't believe it because he had walked in there, and when he had hit the section, he was excited. The kid refused, totally refused, and he said, I'm not having that, Dad. Refused. Why? Because United, the way they're playing right now, they're losing. They're not winning. That's what this kid is seeing on TV. They're being ridiculed on social media. Everyone's laughing, the brunt of every joke. And does he want to put on that shirt when he goes onto the playground and say, I'm a United fan? He'd rather get the Man City jersey and wear KDB on the back, number 17, because that's a winning brand. It's picking up trophies. It's dominating. So those are the things I think that a lot of people face now. The traditional loyalties are falling away. People want to be entertained, and people want a winning product on the field of play. You can't carry on talking brand, and for Manchester United for a decade has gotten away with the fact that, hey, we were such a commercial behemoth. We were this huge commercial thing. But if you notice that a lot of teams are caught up now with Manchester United, even commercially. Barcelona, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Liverpool, Man City, who are now, in terms of revenue, the richest team in the world. They had the highest revenue last season. It's because of the on-field success. So the on-field success will always translate to equity for your brand. It's that simple, but you got to get that product right. And the problem is when you go and watch our local game, to be honest, there's really nothing there that would inspire my son, or your son if you have one, to return to the stadium and say, Dad, I need to go back there. Take me back to watch that game. There's nothing there. They're going to be bored. Absolutely bored because
watch a nil-all draw.
Yeah, watch a nil-all draw, and it's just so negative. The tactical approach of our coaches right now in our top flight league. So there's nothing there really to get people hooked or interested. Kodara, I mean, listen, when you heard Dynamos was playing Highlanders, it was a game.
Because they're gonna go hell for leather,
It
go
was a
at each
game.
other, and it's gonna end 2-1.
Yes.
But the post is gonna have a
And
day of days.
Yes, and it just wasn't 2 or 3 teams. It was Dynamos, Highlanders, Caps United, Black Rhinos, Zimbabwe Saints. You know, there were so many teams, so many good teams. Tanganda out in the east were playing good football. I mean, producing really good players like Lloyd Mutasa.
Yeah.
You know, and so there were a lot of teams, even the small teams like Mangura, and I say small because I'm talking about where they come from. They would come and leave the big teams at the nosebleed.
Yeah.
They weren't just coming to roll over and lose in Rufaro because they were playing against Dynamos, or go to Barber Fields and just take a beating. No, your Wanges, you know, your what is it? Gweru United, Cisco Steel.
Yeah.
They were producing soccer stars of the year. I mean, James Takavada,
Yeah.
soccer star of the year. Who did he play for? Cisco Steel.
Cisco
in
Steel.
Kwekwe.
Yeah.
Effet Lungu, soccer star. Who did he play for? Rio Tinto in Kadoma. You don't get that now here.
Yeah.
No
You know,
chance.
even now when you go, Dynamos is playing Highlanders this coming weekend at Barber Fields. You try watching that game.
Actually, to that point, I was watching on ZTN their YouTube stream. Man, the numbers are pitiful.
Yeah.
I was like, they've given us this for free. I mean, internet's expensive in Zimbabwe, fair enough. But I mean, if you have access to it, you can still watch it.
Yes.
I was expecting to see 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people. 600, 700 dropping off.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's nothing keeping us there. The last bit of not entertaining football, but the last innovative style of football I saw was Kiglon, when they were trying the tiki-taka back in the day. Don't know when that was, in the mid-noughties.
Right.
That was the last time I saw something I could say, I don't like this team, I'm a Timbare fan. But these guys are interesting.
Yeah. And you see, that's the thing.
I think Norman Mapeza hit it with the AFC Platinum.
And that's the thing. You can point to the teams.
One or
You can't. If I challenge you now to tell us one team that played a defensive masterclass type of football that would have made Diego Simeone proud, you can't. You want to see the passing team, but if we say which were the passing teams in Kiglon, Monomtapa, Norman Mapeza's FC Platinum, you can rattle off names. And you can remember, they're memorable. I mean, I look at that Monomtapa team that Norman Mapeza coached. It was made up of no-namers. These guys, we did not know these guys. We didn't know a Daniel Sokoto. We didn't know Chris Samakwere. But they became household names and brands. Not simply because they won the league, but because they played a brand of football. I never tire of telling this story. My dad was staying in the United Kingdom, came home. He was around for like 2 months. Football fan, decided, okay, I'm going to troop across to DZ Stadium and watch a local footy game. Monomtapa was playing, God knows who. I didn't go with him. He was staying with me at the time. He came back home and he says, I went to watch a local game. The game is in safe hands. It's brilliant. I was like, what? And he says, I went to DZ Stadium and I was like, okay. And he says, I watched this team of young guys. These guys were young and they were stroking this thing around with aplomb. He enjoyed it. It only ended 2-0 to Monomtapa, but he had the time of his life because he was a pure football fan, grew up in an era before our time, loved the purity of the game, and that gave him a glimpse of a time that was. We don't have enough teams now that play like that. And that's why Liverpool is gaining all the new fans it is. Man City is gaining all the new fans that it is. Hansi Flick's Bayern Munich was a thing of dreams for people because they played front foot football, passing football, entertaining, where you can see the players are trusted to try stuff, try a flick. It doesn't come off. The coach still applauds and say, "Well, do it again.
We go again.
Yeah.
Do it again."
It's like Marco Bielsa's Leeds. Not the
There we
best
go.
team in football,
Yes,
but I mean
but-
Bielsa's mind itself, watching it work on the pitch.
We all enjoyed watching Leeds.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
Yeah.
So it's about that enjoyment. So I wasn't watching Leeds because I thought they were going to win.
Yeah.
But I knew they were going to give it a good go.
Yeah.
No matter who they played. They lost some games 6-0, 6-2, but there were some games they won 4-3. And those were the games we waited for and
Yes.
said, hey, this team. That's it. And that's what fans want. Fans want entertainment.
Yeah.
That's it. They want to be entertained. That's what it comes down to.
Don't entertain me on Twitter.
so let's know it. So let's wrap it up. So for clubs, it's this: you need to build pillars. If I got what you guys said, all right, you need to build the structural pillars in the club. So not to go a Man United route where you have the brand but not the product, where you don't have something as rudimentary in football as the director of football to head up, to interface between the board and the coach.
Right.
You need to have the players that are willing to play for the club, understand what the badge means. So if you see Liverpool play, I hate Liverpool with every fiber of my being, but it is inspiring to see them play because it's like Mane, regardless of whether Mane and Salah like each other. If it's Sunday and it's game day, they're teammates. It's all about the cop. There is nothing else, right?
Yeah.
It's a myth, though. Let's just correct it.
Yeah.
People trying to create some sort of rivalry between Mane and Salah. They
There is
get
none.
along perfectly well.
Yeah.
There is no rivalry there, but we love to create these little things.
But that's social media, though.
You know what?
That's
Social
exactly.
media. Take a picture, like they might have been talking about something.
Yeah.
And it's not a thing.
But that's the thing. You got to get your recruitment right. That's a big part of it now. You know, United has spent more money than anyone else.
Yeah, billions
In the last
on
10 years, 1.2 billion. That's more than Man City.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
They spend more money than Man City, spend more money than PSG. Okay? But what have they achieved? Everton is another one. You know, Everton has spent more money than Liverpool in the last 5 years, but they're fighting relegation.
Yeah.
So recruitment is a big part of it. Understanding who you're bringing in, how they fit in, not just from a technical point of view, but also from a cultural point of view. That's a big part of it now. The attitude of the player. Can they fit into the culture of the club? Pogba is clearly not a cultural fit at Manchester United. It simply hasn't worked. And it explains why Fergie got rid of him in the first place. I think people are now beginning to realize that, you know what? Fergie was actually onto something. It's not that he didn't respect the player, but he realized that, you know what, from a cultural perspective, this guy here, he's not going to give us much.
Yeah, and if you're looking for pillars, you were just outlining the summary of pillars. One of the very important pillars is culture. Build the culture of the club, and when you build the culture of a club, what happens is that it starts from within. So when the players understand, the staff understands, the coach understands, the fans end up understanding, and they coalesce around that culture. Great example is some key examples are United of how not, and then Barcelona of how to rediscover when you've lost your way. Manchester United had a cultural model where Fergie was the man. It was all about Fergie. He was a monopoly. What he said went. He left the building, and then he brought in a man in David Moyes who wanted to be collaborative. It was never going to work because the club wasn't structured in a way in which it was about collaboration, and still isn't. It's still structured around Fergie, and that's why they're getting it wrong. Now, if they don't sort that out, they seem to be, with Eric Ten Hag coming in, there won't be the success that they expect. Look at Barcelona. Barcelona has always had that commitment cultural model where it's més que un club, more than a club. We're the national team of Catalonia. Everybody understands that. Everybody understands the value of the badge. Bring in coaches who want to enforce their own cultural model, and it doesn't work. It's tragic that Ronald Koeman being a son of Barcelona, having played there for so many years,
Legend.
didn't get it and thought that he could bring in a cultural model that he had shaped at the Netherlands national team into Barcelona and expect it to work. So what happens? Xavi comes in, pretty much the same sort of makeup of players, barring some clever recruitment he did in January, and the whole thing changes. Why? Hinges on culture. Get the culture right, and everything then starts to revolve around who we are.
Makes a lot of sense, because culture was the next point. Again, a critical pillar. How you attract people is how you carry yourself as a club.
Yeah.
I mean, Barcelona fans, even when the downturn happened with the Koeman era, the pride was still there.
Yes.
Yeah.
With United fans, I mean, after Moyes, I was like, you know what, guys, my
tapping out.
my jerseys are now permanently in the cupboard until things get better.
Yeah, that's because United fans were attracted in by the success. And so when their success dries out,
What keeps them there?
what keeps you there is the culture of a club.
Yeah.
And I know you hate Liverpool, but look at Liverpool in all our troubles, in all our failures.
I mean, even the Roy Hodgson era, you
Yeah.
guys were still
Yes,
Liverpool.
100%.
Anfield was always packed.
We knew Roy Hodgson
There
wasn't good enough.
were no people walking out 10 minutes before the game and so forth. We still sang "You'll Never Walk Alone" before and sang it 5 minutes before the end.
For sure.
Those things remain. Those are the cultural pillars of the club. And the cultural pillars will always guide you when you need to press the reset button.
Yeah.
Look at Barcelona. It went wonky. 18 months later, they say, you know what, it's not working.
Reset.
And it'll make you make the hard decisions.
Yeah.
Messi has to go.
Yeah.
Okay? No one wants him to go, but just the situation at the
For us to
club
fix it.
dictated that he has to go. This is not a one-man thing. This is not about Messi. This is the pride of Catalonia. We have to make hard decisions for our club. So those are some of the things I think in Zimbabwe that we have to work on. I think a lot of if you try and ask yourself, okay, what is the cultural model at clubs X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
It's very difficult for you to pinpoint it and say, hey, this is what the cultural model at Dynamos is, or at Ngezi Platinum Stars, or at Triangle.
Yeah.
No, we don't. The culture at that club so often in Zimbabwe sport is dictated by the coach who's in charge at that moment. What he likes and he doesn't like. What are his methods? He comes in and he dictates, and the problem is he's shown the door.
Average shelf life of a coach 14 months.
Yeah, 14 months.
So late, you start again.
You start again with a new
Start again.
person who comes in with different tastes and a different approach. And so you're not really building anything.
Highlanders' most successful period was when Highlanders owned the tag of being almost the national team of Matabeleland. That's who we are,
ETMS were long.
and we are just going to railroad over anyone who stands in our way because we are that good and we believe it. The minute you start trying to change and shift and become cosmopolitan, and it's you start
And we
losing.
get
your mind.
uncomfortable with those discussions, is that, when we say, oh no, but the fact is, Highlanders is a cultural icon. That's what it is. We like to talk. It's got nothing to do with tribalism. They're a cultural icon, and there is more pride when the fans look on the pitch and what's there is representative of them.
Yeah.
And there's more heart, there's more effort, or because you've got players who understand what wearing that shirt means. Similarly with Dynamos as well. You got to understand what wearing the blue and white means. When people say 7 million, you've got to understand what that means, who you're representing, and that the happiness of 7 million hinges on the outcome of the game that you're playing.
Yeah.
And those things, I think, have been lost now on the modern player and the modern administrator. These clubs are being watered down and diluted, and so forth. So it's a problem. But I feel I so agree. Teams like you mentioned, Club Athletic. They are, what is it? Basque
Nation. Them and
proudly.
But you can tell the difference between them and Sociedad,
Yeah.
even though it's the same.
And they make no apologies for that. It's their identity, and that's what defines them. It's that simple, and that's what our teams here in Zimbabwe have got to do. They've got to establish some cultural models at their clubs that define them on and off the pitch.
And it's easy to sell that on social media, to be honest, and media-wise. You
It
can
really
sell
is.
that because if you see, I'm looking from a fan perspective. If you and me went to the same school and you played for Dynamos, for example, Highlanders. I went to school with Mike. he's playing for Highlanders. I would come every game. The people around you, the athletic model, the Sociedad, or before Sociedad ended that model. But it endeared people to those teams. And I follow Athletic Club on social media because it's amazing to see that these people come from the same region in the same area, and their place is always full. And the social media reflects that. It's sometimes in their local language, and sometimes you have to translate. But that authenticity is very easy to see from how they do things, and it's very easy to sell from someone from Zimbabwe who's on Koromonzi, who was on Twitter, and then saw them like, wait, what is this?
Yeah, and I like the word you've used there, authenticity. And that's where I think the social media content of the other clubs is sorely lacking, because whether it's inauthentic or not, Blair Chiefs has owned it. But now everyone jumping onto the bandwagon, it's disingenuous. You're coming from a place and let me tell you, human beings innately can tell when you're being dishonest. They can tell, and they don't want any of that. So if you are boring, fuddy-duddy, professional, be that, own it. And those that like that sort of stuff are going to follow you. They're going to come after you. You don't have to try and then steal market share in a target market. That's not yours. It's not your target audience. Define your target audience. Say, this is who we are. Lean into that, and you'll get the success that comes with, because likelihood that space is not occupied.
Gentlemen, I've taken way too much of your time.
Not at all.
I enjoyed this thoroughly.
Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Learned a lot about local football, particularly because mine only starts 1999 going forward. After that, before that,
it starts with the treble.
The treble. Got me out there.
It ends there too.
Pretty much ends there too. So thank you very much. I sincerely hope this is something that local football administrators will listen to and be able to get, even fans, like young fans who never understood what it was like in Zimbabwe before, when it was black and white to us, get an idea of what it was like to grow up in an era where everything was scarce, where tech was not as predominant as it is now, where things had to be fought for and won. Guys are offloading trucks to get calendars just for the team. I mean, that's a beautiful story. Thank you very much, guys. We'll do this again hopefully soon.
Absolutely. Good being here.
Thanks for having us.